help to recognize people, and I would ask that you, the first part, let's target it just for questions, clarification, or information, and then once and please we'll try to limit kind of one question per person. Oh, great, we have raised hands, so if people can do that, then we will answer questions as best we can, and then we'll get to comments. So Linda, can I ask you to make a list of hands as you see them, and then we'll recognize people? Great, thank you. Okay, so I think I did see Mr. Sullivan's hand go up first. So you have the floor. What is your question?
Yes, thank you, Councilors Izraelevitz. Patrick Sullivan. I'm the general manager at Central Park Square here in town. I've got several questions, but to limit it to one, I guess I would start off by saying, as this ordinance is written, if I understand it correctly, you must have 75% of the property vacant or 75% of a discrete unit on the property vacant. So, very quickly in my mind, thinking through properties on the map that were shown, there were very few that actually qualified on that map to fall under this ordinance. The ones that stand out to me are Merrimack, the Hilltop House, Motel 6, CB Fox, and the old gas station on Diamond across from the high school. So my question is, given the way this ordinance is written, with fines of a few $100s a year, how is this intended to actually impact change on those property owners that, by the way, all are out of town?
So all I can share is that the city manager of Raton found the communication to be helpful. But you're absolutely right. The map that we've shown is basically individual vacancies and then the building surrounding it. But that is a very good question as to where this ordinance would apply. And again, we're not advocating for one thing or another, but let me just say that an ordinance, of course, is applicable not just to current circumstances, but for future circumstances. I hope that's helpful. Linda, who's next?
Ms. Wheeler?
Yeah, so my question has to do with condemned building. I applaud the council for finally condemning the Hilltop House, which I believe is truly a danger to the community. And how long are you going to allow this fence and razor wire to be around it before you're going to actually make them demolish that building? Because, it doesn't do us a lot of good to go through these various efforts to deal with vacant properties or to condemn them, which the council really needs to do in some cases. And if you can't make the owners actually do something.
Any other council want to take that? Want to take that? Well, let me deflect the question, if I may. This is really the fire marshal is having discussions with the property owner, and we have set some deadlines, but that is part of the conversation that is being held with Ms. Serving. Any other comments?
Denise has a comment.
So I believe that the deadline that the council set for having the building demolished is March 30th. I think that was in what we approved. Councilor Williams, can you confirm that date?
So I think it's the 31st, the end of March. But the bigger point with the Hilltop House is that this is a separate power. It's called clean and lean. So the way that Hilltop House goes is that if the fire marshal and council are unsatisfied with the work on demolishing the building, the county has the power to go in and demolish the building itself, and then bill the owners for the cost of the demolition, and that becomes a priority lien on the property, meaning that that lien takes priority, or in terms of like payouts and foreclosure, it takes precedence over a bank mortgage. So once the lien is in place, the county would then have the power to foreclose on the property, and which would force the sale of it. And the proceeds from the sale would first go to reimbursing the county for the cost of demolition, and only after that would the mortgagor see any money. So the Hilltop House is actually serious business.
Well, thank you both for a much more detailed answer than I was prepared to give. So next speaker is Ms. Madison.
Mr. Birnbaum?
Go ahead, Mr. Berman.
Hi, I just unmuted. So the question I had is what happens if the owner is, especially if they live out of town, if they're refused to do anything? And is there a grandfather component to this? In other words, can we put this ordinance on people that currently own vacant buildings?
Mr. Berman, that's a very good question. So the vacancy is more than 180 days, and frankly, I haven't looked at the ordinance closely enough to see whether that begins after the passage of the ordinance. I suspect that that would be the way it would be interpreted, but that's a question for our legal department. I see Ms. O'Neill has a question.
Yes, Mr. Councilor Izraelevitz, the option for raising hand is not available on all screens right now, whatever way the county has it set up. The question I have is how many buildings would currently qualify under this ordinance, not just the number of buildings that are commercial buildings that are available, but it's my understanding that 75%, you just said earlier, 75% of the building area would have to be vacant. And so, for example, if you take the old Smiths property, how is that divided up? Is that 75% the whole area from the old supermarket down to the Pajarito brew pub? You know, how do you determine your 75% with these buildings? Because that's the building that everybody thinks of when they want to get this taken care of. And from what I'm hearing, there's a doubt as to whether that would be covered under the 75% building area. And then my second question is, how much can be done about all this stuff with the currently in place ordinances and codes? I mean, we have a community development department, and we have code enforcement people, and putting together these inventories of what, 20 vacant commercial buildings. I didn't count the dots fast enough, plus some of them cover multiple vacancies in one location. So it's hard to determine how many exactly buildings you would be looking at. And don't some of the ordinances and codes that are in place to govern the condition of the building, paint coming off it, the garbage, all that stuff? There seems to be a lot that's involved in this ordinance that's actually supposed to be happening. Somebody has to be keeping track of things like the Black Hole building, which I contacted Ms. Servi about a couple of weeks ago. We don't have like 450 buildings that we're trying to monitor.
Ms. O'Neill, let me try to.
My question is, Councillor, why are these things not being handled under the existing codes?
Okay. So the question about which specific properties would apply, I think that is something that would have to be handled by the code enforcement officer, well, if and when this ordinance is passed, right? The detailed view of footprint and discrete units and so forth. So I certainly would not be prepared to say which units would, this would apply to or not. I think we can all kind of take our own analysis of which individual sites this would apply to. The other question you make, I know it's a question, but it's a very good point that we do have already, and this was also raised in the conversation with the city manager of Raton, that we have several ordinances that deal with the effect of a vacant building, whether it is vacant or not. If it is disheveled or not maintained and so forth. And certainly I would want to, as part of any effort to address the vacant property, is to make sure that we use all the tools that we have available, both positive and both sticks and carrots, of which this, I guess, is a stick, but there are other sticks and other carrots that we can use to address the vacant property issue. But if there are specific properties that you are concerned about, I'd ask that you maybe highlight them for me or for staff that we can go over in detail. Are there any? I see DW as yeah. Could you identify yourself and then ask your question?
My name is Stacy Ghani, and I have to say I'm a little confused how you can do a direct comparison with Raton, since they have lost their major employers. And in our case, we are very lucky, and our major employer is in fact actively recruiting. And one of the things that the lab has been doing is going out into the community and renting space. Their budget is clearly going to be larger for those spaces than most small businesses. And I'm just wondering how, is part of this problem with the vacant buildings that the owners may be holding out in the hopes that their space will become of interest to the lab, rather than being willing to look at a smaller business that would not be able to spend the same kind of rent. Thank you.
I know that the LACDC and Ms. McDaniels, who gave the earlier presentation, they've been doing a lot of work talking to property owners and leaseholders to see what lease costs and so forth are related to that. I mean, just personally, there are some properties that would not be appropriate for the laboratory to use that are vacant. That's maybe not the case for all of them, but I see your point, but there are certainly other areas that are vacant properties that would not be subject to a laboratory usage.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. McDaniel, do you want to make a comment on that? Because I know you've been looking at some of these issues.
Sure, yes. So in our conversations with small business owners, three primary concerns have come up in our discussions around why, some of these buildings sit vacant in our community. One primary reason is around the infrastructure. So a lot of our buildings, especially in the downtown corridor, were originally built as office space. They don't have loading docks. They don't have the infrastructure for retail operations. And to compound that issue, a lot of them are outdated, like I said, aging infrastructure as well. So they need to come up into ADA compliance. And a lot of that can be very costly. So who absorbs that cost? Is that the property owner, or is that the small business owner who's coming in and renting the space? In line with that, we've also heard a lot of feedback about the need for smaller spaces. New entrepreneurs who are coming into the community, perhaps coming from a home-based business and looking to expand and have more of a presence here, are looking for small spaces, 1,000 square feet or less. And we just don't have a lot of inventory for those kinds of smaller spaces right now. A lot of them are much larger than a small business is willing to take on. And then the third that we consistently hear about is staffing. Workforce development is a big issue pre-COVID, and certainly made even more apparent during this tough time right now. So entrepreneurs that are looking to get started and take over a property that's currently vacant, they have to staff that property as well. And right now, staffing is an issue even for our current small business owners. So those are just some things that we've been hearing about why some of these properties are sitting vacant.
Thank you. I see Mr. White has his hand up.
Good evening, Councilor Izraelevitz, our other distinguished councilors and members of the public, Greg White. Three quick things, please. As Mr. Daniel just mentioned about ADA compliant, I would think that somehow under the Economic Development Act, the county would be able to help business owners or building owners to make their buildings compliant. Also, in reading over the proposed ordinance, I didn't see anything about whether there would be some kind of protection offered for the 25% or possibly less of businesses that were occupying an otherwise unoccupied building. And I really think, notwithstanding an extreme situation like a pandemic, myself, I know several others I see at the meeting here, and I know several other people, including elected officials, can't understand why, you know, once a building gets to like 3 years vacant or something, like the Smiths, old Smiths is now 7 or more years vacant, we can't use eminent domain. I mean, between Kilo versus New London and Burmer versus Parker and 7 or 8 other cases, and going over the New Mexico statutes, it's quite clear that though there might be a court fight over it, the stuff in the court has timelines that have to be held to. So it's not something that's going to drag on for years and years and years. Certainly, that Smith's building shouldn't be still empty after 7 years or so. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. White. You did intersperse one question among those comments, so I'll answer the question. So no, the current ordinance doesn't make any reference to the occupied part of the properties, but you bring up a very good point. And maybe that's something we should consider at some point, is some kind of protection to make sure that that whatever penalties or whatever may occur, or action that may be taken by the county doesn't negatively impact those businesses, because certainly we don't want to reduce that occupancy capacity.
As a quick follow-up,
Mr. White, let's go around and then we'll go back to comments if we may. So Ms. Dahl, I think you had a question, but you dropped your.
Well, I did. Okay. I don't know if Mayor's question was answered, or if it was, perhaps I didn't understand it. But she was asking, like in the Merrimack property, how do we calculate 75%, since, you know, part of it, if we're going from one end of the old Smiths to the brew pub. And then also, sorry, so Mr. White's question just now about eminent domain. I don't know if that was addressed in your answer. Thank you.
What defines a building? I guess we can use the common sense definition of a building, but there may be some legal complexities about that, and I'm not prepared to answer that. I don't believe we have legal represented here, and probably would be premature for them to comment on any special circumstances under which what we would normally think of a building which in my case, I would think it's that whole Smith, from Smith's all the way to the Pajarito Prupa would be a single building. But that would be up to legal and the code enforcement officers to determine that and at what point it is vacant. And we did not talk about eminent domain. That's a very complicated process and fraught with legal questions. So that is not something that, at least in my tenure as a counselor, we have really seriously considered. So I see that Mr. Birnbaum has another question, but before we do that, I'd like to recognize anyone else who has a question. Mr. Day?
Yes, just getting unmuted. I noticed that the owner of the vacant building must bring the building up to code. And I was wondering if there's any kind of a time frame for that, because that varies, of course, with the how old the building is and how well it's been brought up to code before, and can run into millions of dollars, and that this has been addressed. But I was just wondering, I didn't see anything in here about a time frame on that, and I was just wondering if there can be some help, which also has been addressed by other people, to bring that up so that there's not a huge burden on the new property owner. Another object that I noticed was that I'll say the granular nature of this, of the amount of money that a person would have to pay is pretty coarse, less than 10,000 square feet and greater than 10,000 square feet. And I don't think this cost, how much a person would have to pay, would affect Smith's at all. I think Kroger can afford to do this for a long, long time. So I was wondering if it could be on a per square foot basis, so that maybe the small property owners aren't penalized as much as the larger property owners, especially those who have been sitting on it for some time. And also, I just wanted to make a comment about a vacant building. And I know the Metzger's garage was brought up, and my son brought this up to me, the automotive professionals. He likes to take his car to automotive professionals, but from what I understand, they had to move. What they said in their Facebook was that we spent the past 3 years trying to expand in Los Alamos, but I'm sorry to say that it didn't work out. We've tried to move into the old Metzger shop across from the high school, but it's unfortunately not zoned for auto repair. This business was grandfathered into the county plans for that usage. After an extended vacancy, the building has lost the ability to resume operations. It seemed like this is something that kind of we shoot ourselves in the foot, because I shouldn't see, I don't see where a zoning problem would keep someone from using that space who really wants to expand into it. So those are my comments and statements.
Okay, thank you for your questions. Let me address two of them, and then I'll turn it over to Councilor Williams, who I think is more familiar with your last question. So this ordinance does not address any kind of support or facilitating bringing buildings up to code. That is handled through other building code and so forth. And there are questions about grandfather changes of use and so forth. But basically, this ordinance says that a vacant building is also subject to the same requirements that any other building would have. So it's really kind of orthogonal to this ordinance, bringing things up to code. But however, the council is looking at other mechanisms to support bringing businesses up to code or addressing some of the issues that Ms. McDaniel mentioned to facilitate better utilization of the buildings. Your second question about cost to Smiths and trying to make that progressively larger. Ms. McDaniel mentioned that briefly, that New Mexico, if you start charging someone by square foot or by value of a building, that really is a property tax, and we are not allowed to assess additional property taxes on vacant buildings versus non-vacant buildings. It has to be a uniform property tax based on certain set criteria. So we cannot have the granularity that Mr. Day that you are looking for. It has to be more. It has to be considered a fee, a vacancy fee, and not a tax. So we need to stay on this side of that tax fee question. And then I'll turn it over to Mr. Williams, Councilor Williams, about automotive professionals.
Yeah, so the situation there, so as I think, I don't remember whether it was Jordan or me you were quoting there, but I think it was Jordan. In any case, so first, this was years ago that we were looking at Metzger's Mobile, and this was back when Greg Metzger or Metzger Stores owned it. So I guess one kind of point that's not insignificant is that we weren't as politically involved then as we are now. What I saw as the really big problem for automotive professionals at that time was that the county considers automotive mechanical repair to be an industrial activity. So that means that the usage classes that allow auto repair are heavy commercial, which is the zoning on DP Road, and light and heavy industrial, which is the zoning on Eastgate and also on DP near TA 21. Because the Metzger's Mobile property abuts several houses, I did see it as infeasible to try to get that property rezoned to an industrial zone, and I still believe that. The thing that needs to change with the development code for auto repair is reclassifying mechanical repair as a lighter commercial kind of activity. And so then you have to think about that process versus a real estate transaction, right? I don't think that Greg would have wanted to hold out long for us to be able to change the development code as the zoning classification, as how auto repair is even defined in the development code. I did not think that Greg would want to wait to sell his property until we could get that sorted out. And because there's a large amount of uncertainty in any sort of like massive change to the development code, I don't think we would have qualified for a commercial mortgage with that kind of cloud hanging over the deal. So as a result, it at the time, I viewed it as just totally infeasible to go down that road. And I still believe that as things stood back then, that was true.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Walker, I know Mr. Birnbaum had his hand up first, but again, I'd like to give everybody an opportunity to ask their first question before going to a second round. So Mr. Aaron Walker, you have a question?
Yeah, my question is that the main issue I see with this is that the fees are so low that it's almost insignificant to commercial landlords. I think that I know that there has to be some, wiggle room between it not being a tax, but at the same time, I think that there needs to actually be some force behind the ordinance. Like the way the rates are right now seems to be a little low. That's really all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Mr. Birnbaum, you have another question?
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Izraelevitz. So what I was wondering is what happens if the vacant building owner refuses to register it as vacant or respond to a complaint or court action, especially if the owner lives out of state? I mean, do we have any enforcement capability in that situation with this ordinance?
Like I mentioned, it does go to municipal court if there's an appeal to the county council and the county council affirms the decision of the court enforcement officer and the community development director. And then the municipal court has different fine and theoretically jail punishment for non-compliance, but that's where that would get handled. And as you know, so that's really the only mechanism that the county has for enforcement of noncompliance. I see Mr. Tadeus has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Izraelevitz. Quick comments and then at least one question. I'm not sure the comparison of the communities that have these ordinance are good comparisons for ours. When you look at Raton, Tuncumcari, Silver City, and the parts of Albuquerque that this was initiated, those communities have all had 5, 10, and in some cases 20% population and commercial loss over the last decades. Coming from those communities and having family members in them, they're fighting a very different problem than we are here. And so I would like to take that as a point of concern. There's some concern with how this ordinance in itself is written because it allows you to write a separate section of saying you have to come into compliance with everything that's on the vacant. You word it as getting a permit for the vacant building, and that's not identified what the requirements of that building is, but it alludes that you would have to bring that building up into full compliance like it's an occupied building, which is going to be financially unfeasible. Most of us who do own, and I own one of the buildings in White Rock, I purchased CC Gardens late 2019, and we had planned to actually remodel it, move our offices over, and then things happened. So it's unlikely that the cost of bringing that building up to code, on top of having to carry more general liability and a registration fee, it's much cheaper just to demolish the building for the next 4 to 5 years instead of paying that money. So as a pure base ownership, which will reduce the available commercial inventory even further, driving up the prices up even further, particularly for what we talked about, smaller business owners trying to get their foot in. I've had several calls from people interested in that one about, you know, how much square footage and what it would cost to bring it up. And most small business owners right now don't have the necessary capital to get their business started. So I'm glad we also, you guys, so this is the stick and you guys are also working on the carrot, and I do want to appreciate it. I've talked with Ms. McDaniel several times, and the carrot, I believe, is the main street redevelopment stuff you guys are trying to do. And I would like to encourage us to keep doing that part of it. The question is, can we get more clarification on whether or not you have to bring this up to full compliance like an occupied building? Because that's a really, in my opinion, big showstopper on it. And the second question is this just to try to clean up buildings, get a lien on them so that you can get a lien instead of an eminent domain to get a property and thus acquire property? And I guess a third question, is this an attempt in any way to try to address getting small business and small commercial restarted here? Do you think that that will help?
So I very much appreciate your comments. We don't want to have unintended consequences of this, and this is part of this town hall, is to get that type of information. The issue of clarification, I think, is an important one, and we'll make sure that it's considered when we look at the ordinance itself. We'll make sure that that's one of the questions that will be asked of legal, and whether this will help or not. That's part of what this conversation is about, and we want to hear from people, both property owners, larger property owners, small property owners, such as yourself, and to see, given our inventory and in our particular circumstances, whether this is the right approach or not. So I see Ms. Sidabaka and then Mr. Jolly, and then we'll go back to Mr. White.
Thank you. First of all, I agree with everything Mr. Tadeus said. He made some excellent points. The demolition of buildings would absolutely hurt Los Alamos. And I think that that's a road we're traveling down. You're trying to use a stick to get at Smith's, to get at Kroger's and the bigger developers. And what it's going to do is end up hurting some of the smaller developers that have been trying to bring their buildings up to code and find ways to do that. But to me, the greatest impediment to that has been the county. The interpretations of codes not the codes themselves, but the county and the fire marshal's interpretations of codes have been all over the map, costing us time and development dollars, to where I've been trying to get a bathroom, an extra bathroom put in a suite, and it's taken me 2 years. And most of that impediment has been at the county level, trying to get the permits and getting, you know, different answers from different people. I know that your development specialist is trying to work through that and help us, but it's really difficult. You know, doing business in Los Alamos is more difficult than any other city I've ever worked in. And I think most of that is because not everybody is on the same page. Everybody's working from different code books, and their own interpretations are all over the map. My greatest fear with this is that will be another level of misinterpretation of intent, where what you intend this vacancy ordinance to do will not satisfy the need that we have to force big developers like Kroger into doing something progressive with their property. I really agree with Sean Williams on his analysis of the Metzger's property and auto professionals. You know, we run into that zoning zoning problem on multiple levels, and it's not an easy fix, but it is fixable. But I think he's got the sanest way forward. I would caution you to reconsider this in terms of the fact that it will hurt the smaller owners more than it will impact the larger owners. And if you're going to go after Kroger's, we've got much better ways of doing that. And I don't think your legal counsel is pursuing it with the right mindset. I think they're pursuing it with a protect the county at all costs, as opposed to protect the citizens at all costs. So that's just my 2 cents.
Okay, well, thank you. So I just want to remind, and I appreciate Cita Vacant, I think you came in late, but we wanted to start with clarification questions as well as we can answer them, and then go to comments. But I appreciate your comments, and I know that you've been involved in this issue for many years, and you're one of the local property owners, so you're certainly very familiar with these issues. So now let's go to Mr. Jolly. And then I think we'll go back to Mr. White.
Thank you, Councilor Izraelevitz. And actually, I think most of what I've got is actually a comment too, rather than a question. So if we say when we're going to reach that point.
Yeah. So unless Mr. White, if you don't have a question, then we'll turn to the comments, and then that'll be the end of our discussion. So. Mr. White, do you have a question or a comment? Okay, so we'll turn to comments. Now, Mr. Jolly, if you want to go ahead and address your comments.
Okay, thank you. It's nice to see that we've got so many people on this town hall tonight is how I can start, because I know we do have, as a community, a lot of concerns. Not as much about vacant buildings. I think it's been pointed out, and even in the public notice, the picture of Smith's tells us what it's all about. I hope the councilors listening have gotten an idea. One of the things that's come up in several different ways is that the devil is in the details. And there are several times, Councilor Izraelevitz, I've heard you say that you don't have an answer to a question. I think by the time this comes up for a public hearing, those things should be ironed out. And maybe staff should do some more research to find out. And now I'll segue into, because we don't want unintended consequences to come from this. It's one thing, build an inventory, and in my mind, reading through the ordinance again this afternoon, the proposed ordinance, it really is collecting an inventory of these spaces more than anything else, because the only enforcement action contemplated revolves around whether or not a property owner registers his property for that or hers. And in unintended consequences, and when we're talking about Smith's, one thing that comes to my mind goes back, there are a couple of questions about what defines a vacant property, and that 75% number. I think of the Smith Shopping Center, and actually that Merrimack Center has 2 sides. So it depends on how you look at the property, because you've got the side that has the brew pub on down through the vacated Smith's building. On the other side, you have, if my count is right, 3 restaurants that would be probably permanently out of business if an unintended consequence was that Smith's decided to raise that shopping center, because it was easier to do that than come up with too many, jump through too many hoops for the county. So I don't want us to forget as a community, every time we talk about the Smith Shopping Center, we're talking about those restaurants over there too. And to me, that's very important. And then finally, I wanted to mention, because this also came up, absent this proposed ordinance, code enforcement does operate. And as the person who cared for that Mesker's gas station building across the street from the high school for the 3 or 4 years that we had it for sale, and I might insert there too, that prior to the sale that we concluded about 3 or 4 years ago now, that building sat vacant and 0 interest on it for almost 3 years. So the fact that that was a vacant building was not something that either Greg or I wanted to have happen. We wanted to put it to productive use. We were excited to deal with Sean and Jordan about the auto shop, but that just wasn't a viable solution. But back to what Shannon said just a minute ago, we don't want to publish or punish local people unintended because we want to get after Smiths. But I will say that during the time that we had that building vacant, I was visited by code enforcement a couple of times, and they enforced the codes on a vacant building. And I think we could say as a county, we want to make that more of a priority. We might even want to figure out ways to lean more heavily on vacant buildings than we do operating businesses. But I think that that avenue is available to us. It is being used because I had to go over and meet the code enforcement officer a couple of times. And so that is being done. And I think that is an avenue we should really consider, again, to accomplish what we want to here. I appreciate the opportunity to talk.
Thank you, Mr. Jolly. So I apologize, Mr. Courtwright, you had your hand up. So do you have a comment or a question?
Trying to get the right button pushed. So appreciate the time tonight. I think I'm just surprised that this is a big deal. I mean, you got 20,000 people in this town. You got 49 participants, and about 10 of them are going to be here. They just are here because they're supposed to be. So that's not very many. And I think you need more. You keep going to the thing about asking a question and not making a comment. I didn't know it was divided in half, so I'm glad I waited till now. But I don't know why we're doing this, because if it's because of the Smith stuff and Kroger's, well, the county council screwed up long ago. Now you're trying to fix it. You should have told Kroger's that if they're going to build and get the tax breaks and everything over the school property, you don't get to hand tie everything across the street. So now you're trying to fix it by penalizing some of the other people in town. I don't think half the people in this town realize what work this is. And Shannon is right there with it. So is Mr. Jolly. That Mesker's place over there, that's been there. That's been an automotive place, since I was here. I grew up on Sandia. So what else do you think you're going to do with that? You want someone to come in and raise that building and do what? I mean, you need another auto mechanic shop. It's set up to do that. And if you're worried about 3 or 4 people on 40th Street, then you've got to look at what is the best thing for the community, not for 3 or 4 people. That is not how this works. And I'm just disappointed that, it's come to here we are trying to push the business owners again and trying to make things work, and I don't know why you're comparing to Raton, because, Raton's 200 miles away. So the heck with them. Albuquerque's got a problem. They got vacant buildings, people move in, drug use and whatever. That's not the problem here. That is not what's going on. If the problem is just trying to get some businesses going and everything. And the gentleman, sorry, his name escapes me right now, but the gentleman that bought CB Fox, he just flat out told you, he is not going to do anything with that building until the lab puts out another RFQ. So it's going to sit there. And you guys are sitting there trying to do something that, just doesn't happen in this. Those days are gone. You've got to stop penalizing the small business owners. I have tried to do some stuff down there in White Rock and was told that, nope, we don't want that there. So we're just going to make them tear it down. I'm trying to offer a service. We're trying to do something, that helps what people want and help clean the town. And it just irritates me that you're not even discussing the empty houses in town or those places. You want to go after the business people that are downtown trying to make a go of it and trying to make things work. Sure, I am all for safety. My dad was a safety engineer. There's no question. I have yet to see a building that has got something falling off of this being dangerous. So, and yet I've got a house right around the corner from me that's been empty for 4 or 5 years. And no one cares about that. If you want to do something, then do that. But don't sit here and just pick on the business owners again. That is just not fair. Sean is right. Sean had, they moved to Santa Fe. There's nothing, that's their business. If they want to do it, that's fine. But, if they wanted to expand and they can't do that simply because 3 or 4 neighbors are complaining, well, you've got to go where things happen, because the biggest problem in this town is what Lauren mentioned, is that nobody needs Smith's grocery store. They need to be able to use the mobile station. Well, you think someone's going to move into that mobile station and make that work? I mean, the old Texaco station, not without spending a bunch of money. That's not going to happen. So I think the better way to do this is, first of all, George Chandler made a good comment in the thing, and thank goodness someone told everybody that this is a bad plan. Thank you, George. But the problem is not, you're trying to beat a stick over something that can't happen. It's not going to happen overnight, and you're penalizing people that are trying to. Trust me, there's lots of people that want things to happen in Los Alamos. Shannon's right there in the front, but you can't do it without some money coming in. That just doesn't work that way. Everybody's got this opinion, and you've got 53 people at Fort now 48, that think that we can just build another building, just go and upgrade it. Well, you can't. You don't have the cash flow. It doesn't work that way, especially in this expensive town, especially when people, the first thing they can do is go up to Santa Fe, they do it. So let's not be penalizing. If you want to clean up the town and start with stuff, then let's start with the local neighborhoods where they feel proud and clean up some of that stuff. You can start by cutting all the dead trees in town. There's 15 along the golf course just for gaggles. And then we can start talking about the rest of the place. Because frankly, those buildings are not, except for the Hilltop House, they're not boarded up. There's no ugly stuff. There's no graffiti. It's just empty. Well, give us a reason. But as I say, Shannon's trying to do it to the local people, but the other gentleman from Colorado said he's not going to do anything until he gets another RFQ. And then that's just going to be a business office. So there's not going to be a local business. So that's just nuts. So I appreciate the time, but this needs to be more of a discussion thing than just answering questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cortright. And this is the purpose of this town hall, is to discuss all these issues that you have raised. And I let me just say that I think it is helpful to have a specific ordinance in front of us that we can then look at and see what the ramifications of it is. So whether this is the right approach or not, I think that this is a good conversation to have. Now it's 7:33, I see. We have 3 more commenters. So I hope it'll be okay if we just make these the last 3 comments. Mr. White, you've been waiting to make your second comment, and then Mr. Walker, and then we'll end with with Talley, Kevin and Michelle Talley. So Mr. White, go ahead.
Thank you, Councilor Izraelevitz. having been in construction for a number of years, I can respond to two people. When it comes to the building codes and bringing them up, and they can find all this information on the Construction Industry Division website. There's no like bringing up some code or, it's when a building transfers ownership, legally, it's required whether the old owner or the new owner does it. And if it's the new owner, they have a certain time period. You can find out from the Construction Industry Division. The electrical and mechanical codes have to be brought up, if at all feasible, to what the current codes are now. Obviously, if something, say, is in the concrete of the foundation, they're not going to require you to tear up the concrete. But anything else, you have to. Also, an empty building, it is always a great fire hazard, as well as the possibility of other hazards. The Hilltop House and the Vacant Smiths building are perfect examples because they don't meet the current fire codes. And even though electricity might be shut off to most of the building or even all of it, there's other things that can cause fires. And, particularly something like Smith's, I'm sure our inspectors don't go in there regularly to even know whether the roof in the old Smith's is constantly leaking or not, which then can then lend to other problems for the businesses down the line that are still there. So I think it's important that we have some means of making sure that vacant buildings are buildings that are safe for the community. I mean, if Hilltop House caught fire, it's a very good possibility it wouldn't be the only thing catching fire. Even though we got a fire department almost across the street from it. Embers, as we all know from forest fires around here, carry for miles. So you have a huge structure like that in a small rural town like ours, and it's posing a hazard to our whole community if it catches fire.
So, Mr. White, given the lateness of the hour.
That's basically what I wanted to say. Thank you very kindly, and I appreciate the counselors and everybody attended tonight to offer their opinions.
Thank you very much, Mr. White. So we'll have Mr. Walker making concluding comments, and then Tally, and I see that Mr. Chandler, so that will conclude, that will be the last comment, and then we'll conclude this meeting.
All right, thank you. So I'm just kind of in awe of this whole thing. Anytime you get 50 people to come to a town hall or a county council meeting, that's actually a significant amount of people to take their time on a weeknight to come and listen and participate in this process. So 50 people is no laughing matter. This is a serious issue. The reasoning behind this is because we need to try and get small businesses in this town. It's not happening right now. It wasn't happening before COVID. The other thing I wanted to ask is there any plan to have a town hall or meeting with just business owners, like actual storefront retail owners, in a more private setting, in case there are any business owners that may be in fear of retaliation against by their landlords if they make comments that are not in line with what the landowner wants. Thank you.
So, Mr. Walker, I agree with you 100% that having this attendance, I think, indicates the interest and importance of this issue. And I do encourage people to come to the February 1st public hearing to see further discussions. We do not have plans for another town hall before the meeting, and regardless, all these meetings would be public. So I don't think we could accommodate the privacy that Mr. Walker would like. So Mr. Talley, you're next, and then Mr. Chandler, and And then I'll leave it to my fellow councilors if they would like to make some concluding comments. Mr. Talley, go ahead.
Thank you guys for your time. Basically, I just wanted to make a comment. We got a supply versus demand problem. So basically, small business owners, they're going to have a really hard time competing with the rent rates that Lanel can pay. And so what I've been trying to do is I've been trying to find a place to buy so that I can control the expenses that would be incurred in running a small business. Well, I keep running into problems with affordable properties. The county, or for whatever reason, there's a demolish property situation that I keep running into. For example, Catherine's down in White Rock, the old restaurant. I made an offer on that property while it was in foreclosure. And for whatever reason, I didn't get any sort of response out of my offer. I went to the foreclosure sale, and at the, on the courthouse steps, I watched the sale happen for $800 more than the offer that I made. That property was then flipped to the housing partnership the very same day. And then that property was just neglected to the point where it was then demolished. And so, I walk downtown and I make, phone calls to property owners saying, hey, I'm interested in your 1-story section of this giant building. Maybe I could make an offer on this 1-story section. And it's being held hostage. If you want this, downtown storefront, you get to buy the whole $3 million property. So, like if Los Alamos wants to encourage this for Main Street, then that's what's going to happen. But, small businesses cannot come up with $3 million to do something. We can't come up with $1 million to buy a building. It's not possible. But, if we had some sort of investment or some sort of structure to make it easier, then people would be happier to try to make things happen. So thank everybody for their time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Talley, and good luck. And I encourage you to, if you haven't, to have conversations with Ms. McDaniels, who's collecting information on available property.
Yeah, she's been really wonderful, and the Small Business Center has been gracious enough to find us a place that allows us to run a retail business here in Los Alamos. And so hopefully we'll be able to find a place that we can afford to buy and stay here permanently.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So Mr. Chandler, you have the floor, and since I know you well, I could ask you frankly to be brief in your comments. So
I'll do my best, David. Thank you, Mr. Izraelevitz, Mr. Chair. So in the last part here, you've started hearing from business people. You've heard from landlords, people who own property. Mr. Thaddeus put it in a nutshell, but you're hearing the same thing now. But why is this happening after you've written the ordinance? You've put the cart before the horse. You wrote an ordinance and then you go out and talk to people. This is a complicated problem. If you listen carefully to all the things that were just said by all these business people, you hear that it's a multi-dimensional problem. Every one of them had a different story to tell. Before you can deal with this problem, you need to understand it. And that means that you need to talk to the people like Mr. Thaddeus and Mr. Courtwright and Sean about the experiences they've had. You need to understand the national marketplace, the state marketplace. You need to understand the marketplace that landlords are looking at when they want to invest in a building or invest in renovating a building. And then you create a grand strategy, and an ordinance like this could be a part of a strategy like that. If it were properly drafted, but it should be drafted with an eye to the strategy the overall strategy for developing the economy of Los Alamos. And that brings me to the second point, which is this ordinance is terrible. It's just a legal piece of, it's no good. It's a bad, bad law. I don't know who drafted it. I hope it wasn't the county attorney, because if it is, should be ashamed of himself. It's incomprehensible. It's unenforceable. It's missing key definitions, and you should just discard this ordinance and start over again, and do it as a part of a grand strategy. I, of course, have sent you a letter, the council, and it was published in papers today, describing in some detail the problems with that ordinance. And I think you should read that carefully and try to understand it. So please don't do this ordinance. If you're going to do one, don't do this one. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone for participating. I'm going to yield the floor to Councilor Derkacs and Councilor Williams if they would like to say some things, and then I'll make some closing comments.
So I would just like to thank everyone who participated tonight. It's very important to hear from the community on the issues. We'll certainly take all the comments under advisement. We, as we stated earlier, the public hearing is the first meeting in February. I hope that you all will attend that as well. And I guess that's all we have to say. Just again, thank you. And we will look into all the issues that you raised.
Councilor Williams?
Yeah, so I guess since I did become a bit of a focal point in this discussion, I'll say on the one hand, so our move as automotive professionals move to Santa Fe was very complicated. And on the other hand, it was very simple. And the simple fact is it was cheaper for us to move to Santa Fe than to stay in Los Alamos. And until that problem is resolved, there's not going to be very much small business here. So the fundamental question for this ordinance is whether or not it will change that fact. And of course, I've got basically a week and a day to think long and hard about that question. But that is the central question, and that is the central question at the heart of all business issues of Los Alamos, at least certainly in terms of my experiences, Jordan's experiences, and the experiences of my friends who have both stayed and left in the county. Yeah, so I guess that's probably about it. But otherwise, thanks to everyone for attending, and I'm sure it'll be just as lively next week. Thanks.
So again, thank you everyone for attending. Let me give you a little bit of a personal perspective just for a few minutes. So the issue of vacancy ordinance has been around for several years, has been suggested many different times. Originally, Councilor Robinson and I kind of tried to come up with at least something that would be a focus of discussion. So that's why we looked at the most recently passed ordinance, which is in Raton, as a skeleton to see how and whether it would apply to Los Alamos. So this is part of the process. And Mr. Chandler may be correct that we should have not started with a draft, but this is the approach that we took that has advantages and disadvantages. And like Councilor Derkacs said, we will be looking at all the comments, both here and written, and we will take all those into advisement, and then I suspect we'll have a very good discussion next on February 1st. So again, thank you very much for your help, and thank you to Ms. Madison for helping with all the arrangements. And again, my apologies for the delay in getting us started, but there was a conflicting Zoom meeting that we had to suspend before we could start this one. So I appreciate everybody's patience. So with that, I think we will conclude the meeting. So thank you all. Bye-bye.